In this video, you're going to see exactly what drives the scooter error I was getting, what broke the scooter, and how I fixed it. I'm also going to show you a mistake I made and tell you how to do it the proper way. Also, there was more than just this E2 error, and if you stick with me to the end, I'll show you how I fixed some screws that had just given up. I'm not a mechanic, but this scooter was a paperweight without any fixes. The same issue can happen to any scooter, so if you're getting an error on your scooter, stick around to the end and I'll show you how I fixed it. The first thing I did was take apart the base, which I'm not going to go through here. I just did a video on that with another fix for my other kid's scooter. It wouldn't charge, so if you need it, click on the card. I didn't see anything obvious in the base of the scooter. I looked for wires that were disconnected or potentially overheated and fused together. Everything looked normal, so I moved to the top. I knew from the error table posted on the manufacturer's website that an E2 error was tied to an accelerator failure, and I had long suspected there was a continuity issue in the accelerator, despite the manufacturer saying that the accelerator needs to be replaced. Kids are really hard on these things. I pulled the rubber handles off and used a 2.5mm metric hex to loosen the accelerator on the handlebar. Once I was able to slide the accelerator up to grip, I noticed it had become completely severed from the wiring harness. That might have something to do with it. So I needed to get to the top of the handle. And as I started looking around more, I noticed that the brake wiring cable was also barely hanging on. Wow, so now it's like 5 wires I gotta fix. I started measuring the handlebars to find out why this would happen because something looked off. Turns out over time and maybe several drops by my kids, the wire passed through a hole in the center of the bar had shifted an inch off center and was responsible for severing 3 sets of wires. In fact, if you look through the center of this hole, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. That hole that's shifted a little bit to the right should be in the center. There's a few Allen wrench screws behind the headlight that you can loosen to tighten and realign, but I didn't know that yet, so I used a coercion device to center it. Don't do this. The biggest struggle I had was trying to figure out how to disassemble the top of the handle on the scooter. There's no obvious joints, so I just started pulling, hoping for the best. Turns out with a pair of channel locks, you can snap the top screen off without damaging it. And once you do that, you can pull out the LED display board by removing 3 Phillips head screws. They're tiny. And then make sure you have a tray to keep up with those tiny screws so you can put them back in later. The headlight also snaps off with a little help from our channel lock friends. Turns out the headlight was completely severed as well. I should have known better. I mean, now that's 7 wires I need to repair to get this thing functioning again. Time to break out the heat shrink and soldering iron. So I have my dad to thank for teaching me how to solder, but don't let this poor solder job represent any of his teachings. I'm a measure once, cut twice kind of person, and he's got calipers that go down to like 1/10,000th or something. So anyway, if you don't want to solder, I'll link to some butt splice or wire splice connectors in the description. I'll also link to some heat shrink that you can use to make these connections resistant to water. If you don't even like that approach, you can pick up a replacement from Amazon for like 12 bucks, and I've linked to that in the description below. So clicking on those links and ordering really helps me produce more of this content. It is much appreciated if you use those links to order. There's a wiring harness inside the handle. You may want to disconnect before you start splicing and soldering so you don't fry anything up there. That's like telling me to cut the power before I replace a fan. What's a challenge without a little risk? Once I had all the tiny wires disconnected from their harness, stripped and soldered back together with my trusty solder from Radio Shack. Apparently there's about 400 Radio Shacks still in existence. I wrapped them in electrical tape for good measure. I put some heat shrink around the harness connections and reconnected everything so I could test. Success! The headlight's now working after a double tap on the power button once it's been turned on. The brake now makes the brake light on the rear flash when compressed, and the accelerator appears to be working because there's no more E2 error. I was able to spin the wheel, depress the accelerator, and see it take off while I was on the counter, so I knew I'd fixed it. Now I just need to get this thing back together without breaking it. I left the lights on as I wrapped everything in electrical tape and reassembled to make sure my solder joints were solid and nothing came apart. You could probably do this fix with a wire splice connectors and no solder, but it likely won't be as watertight, and it may not hold as well as a good solder, but obviously replacing the whole thing would probably be your best option. So another issue I had was the 4 hex screws in the handle had come loose because this thing was treated like a rag doll. In fact, 2 of the screws were missing because they'd loosened so much in the threads to the point where an M5 screw wouldn't even stick in and wiggle around. So I got out my trusty tap set to cut new M6 threads into the metal so I could put 4 new screws in it. I put some thread lock on there, not Loctite, it's a different brand, but just cheap thread lock to keep these things from wiggling around, and hopefully they'll stick in a little bit longer, even with mistreatment. I tightened back down the accelerator, I pushed the wires back in as far as center as I could, then I put back the protective rubber strip, and I put the grips back on. So next came the headlight and then the LED panel back into position, and once that was tight, I verified everything still worked, and I popped the cover back on. I just needed to get this done before I got any more trouble on the kitchen counter doing this repair. It's just too bloody hot outside. I still had to finish reassembling the base, but I got it back together with less strain on the wiring harness than was initially there. I took her out for a test and she's already beaten up again. Scooter repair isn't that difficult, and you can make this as easy as you want. You can just order the parts and replace those without doing any soldering. So really, good luck on your project. You can do this, and if you have questions, throw them down in the comments below. Please click that like and subscribe button to let me know that you liked it, and I'll catch you on the next one.